Welcome back to another video, guys. Today we are going to talk about the cubital fossa. We will talk about the boundaries of the cubital fossa as well as the contents of the cubital fossa, which can be divided into superficial contents as well as deep contents. Now, just before we start with today's lesson, what I want to say that the cubital fossa is a space. It's a space of the upper limb, and there are so many other spaces throughout the body. So when you talk about the spaces of the body, you have to talk about it in a systematic way. So you use a systematic approach. You have to show that you're organized when you're answering a question on a space. So you always start with the boundaries, which you can call also borders, and then you jump into the contents. If there are superficial and deep contents, then you separate them that way. And when you do that, when you talk about, for example, now in this case, the cubital fossa, the deep contents, you always want to start from the medial aspect. So you mention all the contents that are found from the medial aspect and then moving to the lateral aspect. So always use that systematic approach. Try to be as organized as possible. Now, let's jump into the borders or boundaries of the cubital fossa. So let's start with our medial and lateral epicondyle, which are shown here. And that's your proximal boundary. So you have a proximal boundary, an imaginary line that goes from the medial epicondyle to the lateral epicondyle. Then you have the lateral boundary over here and your medial boundary on this side. So you're basically creating a triangular intermuscular space. Now the lateral boundary, it's made by the brachioradialis muscle. Brachioradialis muscle. While the medial border boundary is made by the pronator teres. Okay, so proximally you find an imaginary line between the medial and the lateral epicondyle. Laterally you find the brachioradialis muscle, and medially you find the pronator teres muscle. With that, you also have the roof and the floor. So let's start with the floor. The floor is made by the brachialis muscle. So you can review all of these muscles in my previous video, which is the muscles of the arm, where I go through all of these muscles, all the muscles of the arm, their innervation, their origin and insertion. So if you want to learn more about the muscles of the arm, review my previous video. So the floor is made by the brachialis muscle, and then the roof, which is made by an extension that comes from the biceps brachii tendon, which is known as the bicipital aponeurosis. Okay, so that concludes our boundaries or borders of the cubital fossa. Again, you have proximal boundaries, proximal boundary, a lateral boundary, medial boundary, you have your floor as well as your roof. Now let's jump into the contents. So we'll start with the deep contents. So let me change color over here. And we can start, like I said earlier, from the medial aspect of the cubital fossa. Now, what we find medially here is the median nerve, followed by the brachial artery and brachial vein, and then it's followed by our biceps brachii muscle and tendon, and then finally by the radial nerve. So these are the deep contents of the cubital fossa. Again, starting from the medial aspect, you find the median nerve, followed by the brachial artery and brachial vein. Now the brachial artery here breaks down. So it breaks down into the ulnar artery and into the radial artery. Okay? Rather than break down, it divides. Okay, so the brachial artery divides into its two terminal branches, the radial artery and the ulnar artery, followed then by the tendon of the biceps brachii muscle, and then finally the radial nerve. Also, you can find here that the radial nerve breaks down as well. It divides. It divides into its superficial branch and into its deep branch. So this is your superficial branch of the radial nerve, and this is your deep branch. Okay, right. So that concludes the deep contents of the cubital fossa. So now we can move on to the next diagram over here, and this one highlights all the superficial contents. So let's use a different color again. So what we have over here is the cephalic vein, which originates from the anatomical snuff box. Okay, so that's your cephalic vein. This is your basilic vein. Now there's a connection between the cephalic vein and the basilic vein, which is also found at the cubital fossa, and that's the median cubital vein, which is this one over here. Then what we also have is the median antebrachial vein, which is this one over here, which is also a branch that comes off from the basilic vein. Then we also have two nerves. One of them is the medial cutaneous nerve of the forearm. While the other one, as you may guess, is the lateral cutaneous nerve of the forearm. And then finally, to conclude, the last superficial content that you can find around the cubital fossa, which maybe is not visible through gross anatomy. So while you dissect the body, you might not be able to find this, but the last superficial content is the superficial cubital lymph nodes. Okay, so I'm not going to draw them here, but I'm just going to highlight over here that you can also find superficial cubital lymph nodes. Okay, so that concludes then today's video. So we talked about the boundaries, the proximal, lateral, medial, the floor, the roof, and then we talked about the contents, the deep contents and the superficial contents. Remember that when you talk about spaces, it's always important to use a systematic approach. Make sure that you're starting from one aspect of the body and you go to the other. So in this case, we went through all the contents from the medial aspect to the lateral aspect. So try to use this systematic approach rather than rather to answer randomly. With that said, if you enjoyed today's video, make sure to leave a like down below, and if you have any questions, put them down in the comment section below. And I'll see you guys in the next video.